When we picture a serial killer, we usually imagine a monster. We expect a social outcast, a chaotic drifter, or an erratic lunatic stumbling through an alleyway in the middle of the night. Dennis Rader was none of those things. He was a married father of two. He served as the president of his local church congregation. He led a Boy Scout troop, worked steady blue-collar jobs, and lived in a quiet Kansas neighborhood. But for 17 years, he used that boring, suburban life as camouflage. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader broke into homes across the Wichita area. He bound, tortured, and killed 10 different people, earning himself a terrifying pseudonym, BTK. For 30 years, Rader successfully navigated the gap between a family man and a serial killer. He stopped, he went quiet, and he left investigators with nothing, right up until the moment he decided to help them catch him. The very traits that made him a ghost, his rigid discipline and his obsessive need for control, were quietly setting a trap. For 3 decades, the mask held, until the same psychology that built it began to tear it down. In the 1970s, at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, the Behavioral Science Unit began classifying serial predators into 2 broad categories: disorganized and organized. Disorganized killers leave physical evidence and strike impulsively. Rader, however, was the definition of an organized predator. He lacked empathy and remorse, but he possessed an extreme amount of operational discipline and forethought. His early experiments with animal cruelty evolved into a series of rigid, autoerotic fantasies that he nursed for decades. By the time he transitioned to human victims, each murder functioned as a calculated execution of a plan he'd rehearsed in his mind hundreds of times. He even weaponized his day job. For years, Rader worked for a national security company, installing alarm systems in residential neighborhoods. He knew exactly how home defenses worked, how to bypass them, and how to troll for victims without raising any suspicion. This psychopathic discipline turned him into a ghost. Law enforcement had no fingerprints, no reliable eyewitnesses, and no leads. But his ability to plan and execute was subservient to an incredibly fragile ego. Rader suffered from narcissistic personality disorder. For him, the private thrill of the killings eventually lost its edge. He needed an audience. He needed the public to recognize his power and fear his intelligence. Throughout the late 1970s, he sent a series of taunting letters and packages to local media outlets and police. He detailed his crime scenes and explicitly demanded the press call him BTK so he could build his own brand of terror. By 1991, Rader stopped killing entirely. He packed his horrifying trophies away, maintained his strict operational discipline, and disappeared. The trail went dead for 13 straight years. Then, in early 2004, a local newspaper published an article noting the 30th anniversary of his first murders. The piece mentioned that many young people in the city had never even heard of the BTK killer. For a severe narcissist, being forgotten is worse than being caught. That perceived slight fractured Rader's discipline. He had to remind the world that he was still there. In March 2004, Rader resumed his letter-writing campaign. He was convinced he was the smartest person in the room, treating the police investigators like intellectual peers in a cat-and-mouse game he controlled. But he was an aging man operating with a 20th-century mindset. He placed an ad in a local paper, asking the police if a floppy disk could be traced back to a specific computer. The police took out their own ad and lied, telling him the disk was perfectly secure. Believing them, Rader mailed a 1.44 megabyte floppy disk to a local television station. Rader didn't understand metadata, the digital footprints in the file structure. Forensics extracted deleted code, unearthing 2 data points, Dennis and Christ Lutheran Church. Investigators matched this to leadership records. Within days, this footprint pointed to a single suspect. Rader's need to prove his superiority blinded him. He tried to play a 21st century forensic game using analog rules, and he handed the police the exact tool they needed to destroy his camouflage. Physical evidence quickly converged on the church council president. Investigators checked his house and found a black Jeep Cherokee parked outside, perfectly matching a vehicle seen on surveillance footage dropping off an earlier package. To lock the case tight, police secured a medical sample from Rader's daughter. Modern familial DNA analysis confirmed that the DNA found underneath a 1986 victim's fingernails was a direct genetic match to Rader's family line. On February 25, 2005, police arrested Dennis Rader. Sitting in the interrogation room, realizing the police had deceived him, Rader confessed to all 10 murders, telling detectives, "The floppy did me in." Because his crimes predated Kansas reinstating capital punishment, the judge handed Rader the harshest penalty available, 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Rader's story shows that violent predators often look like entirely average citizens, but the narcissism required to systematically end human lives is a self-destruct mechanism. Eventually, the ego demands recognition, and arrogance always leaves a footprint.